introduce our first speaker. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Jill Hamberg from SUNY Empire State. And she's going to give a presentation on Cuba's recent policy reforms, the case of housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sachi, for inviting me. And if you have any question about why a talk on Cuba is being given in a Conference and Partition, we'll consult with Sachi afterwards. I'm also very happy to be here because many years ago, I taught for a while here at SUNY Westbury. I'm now at another SUNY school, and that's where I met Sachi and Shefali and their children when they were like 1 and 2 years old, I think. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm an urban planner by training, and I've done research on housing in Cuba. So that's what this presentation will be about, focusing on recent reforms. Anyway, in the last few years, Cuba has undergone far-reaching reforms. Today I'll focus on recent changes in housing policy, concentrating on the best-known reform, that is free market housing sales. Indeed, you may have been read in the New York Times or other newspapers about Cuba's hot new real estate market and what the newspaper erroneously referred to as the privatization of housing. I won't be speaking today about related themes that I've researched and written about, such as the evolution of all aspects of Cuban housing policy, Havana slums, housing rehabilitation, and community development. But I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have on those issues. Some quick background on major housing legislation is needed to understand recent changes. In the first years after the Cuban Revolution, rents were reduced, evictions halted, and land speculation curbed. Through the 1960 Urban Reform Law, tenants became owners by amortizing the purchase price of their homes with their rents. Landlords and other homeowners got to keep their own and a vacation home. Former landlords received compensation and often lifetime pensions. The concept of leaseholding was used for future rentals, with rents set at 10% of income. Private renting was completely prohibited. Sales were permitted, but the state had the right of first refusal. Instead, when people needed to move, houses were swapped. Mortgages were completely eliminated. In other related policy, land and homes of immigrants were confiscated, which relates a little bit to what we were just talking about in terms of confiscation of property. A major new housing law was enacted in 1984, and it was revised in 1988 and is still in effect today. I just found out yesterday they're working on a major revision. It converted households into homeowners. It legalized most illegal and ambiguous tenure situations from years of self-building. Indeed, private self-building has been so widespread that more than 2/3 of housing units created since the 1959 revolution have been self-built, with or without government support or approval. The law permitted short-term private rentals at free market rates, a policy that was expanded in the 1990s and in recent years. It established an official legal price of each home based on size, location, age, and type of construction. It fostered self-building by individuals and housing cooperatives. It updated existing legislation and on other things, and although not well known, it also allowed free market buying and selling of land and housing. The housing co-ops never got off the ground, and free market sales lasted about a year and a half. Both were eliminated in the 1988 law. By the late 1980s, 85% of Cuban households officially owned their homes, contrary to the usual perception of socialist countries. However, there were some limitations on ownership, and in some ways similar to limited equity co-ops in the United States. Now, in terms of recent reforms, in November 2011, free market sales of homes were legalized. Measures included: people trading homes can now pay the difference in value, buyers pay a transfer tax and sellers personal income tax, residents are still allowed to own only one primary residence and one vacation home, property transfer steps have been simplified, payments must be made through a bank, only residents of Cuba, whether citizens or foreigners, may legally own homes. Property transfers and related matters regarding immigration, divorce, and inheritance have been revised. Other housing-related changes in the last 2 years, which will probably have a much greater effect on housing and affect more people than free market sales, include the lifting of most previous restrictions on building permits and buying construction materials, greater availability of building materials but at higher prices, which is part of a new policy to subsidize people in need rather than products. Credit and subsidies for housing construction and repair, greater recognition of self-building, and further loosening of regulations regarding renting rooms and houses. So what's happened so far? Between November 2011 and the end of March 2012, you can see the figures on sales on the chart. And in terms of what's to come, over 56,000 homes by then have been added to Cuba's property registry, a requirement for property transfers. So why are there so many? There are 3 times more donations than sales. Well, some are really donations to relatives. Others are legalizations of prior illegal and informal transfers, of which there were many. But many are to avoid taxes, disguise the source of funds, or for other reasons. But there are some issues and concerns. First of all, who can afford to buy a home? Some Cubans who have a stash of cash available. Indeed, 13% of depositors control 90% of retail bank deposits. But most are Cubans living abroad who are buying for relatives or for themselves. I shouldn't say most, depending on the area. In some places, it's mostly Cubans living abroad, although it's technically illegal. And some are resident foreigners. Non-resident foreigners. Indeed, some buyers are investing in homes to run them as a small business, such as a bed and breakfast or restaurant. Are loans, mortgages, or subsidies available, since most people don't have the cash to buy? In late 2011, bank loans became available for private self-employed workers, for small private farmers, and for households to pay for materials and labor for home repair, rehabilitation, and construction. So far, the vast majority of these loans have been for home repair and building. Loans may eventually become available to buy homes and other durable goods, but according to the regulations, these will be phased in only as the country's conditions improve. Collateral can include what is now called a, quote, real estate mortgage, but only on vacation homes and vacant lots, and only for the low legal price. Collateral cannot include the borrower's primary residence and other essential income and assets. In other words, currently there are no loans or mortgages available for home purchases. There is also a new subsidy for low-income residents to build and repair housing, but not for purchase. How has the process really been simplified? Indeed, it's no longer necessary to obtain permission from municipal housing departments, which were very corrupt. Instead, the property transfer is conducted through a civil law notary, which is a type of attorney. It can be a potentially long and complicated process. Property must be listed in the property registry, but only 6% were listed when the process started. To be added to the registry, the property title must be updated, including proof of no code violations, exact property boundaries, any changes that have been made, and the legal price established by the 1988 law. As you can see from the photos, sales are likely to be permitted on some violations but not others. This is part of a general crackdown on very widespread building and zoning violations. Well, what about immigrants? Cubans who move to another country can now transfer or sell homes before leaving. Indeed, many current sales are by people planning to leave. But if they haven't done so, the state will transfer the property to family members at no cost, rather than the value being confiscated, as was the case in the past. There may be further changes as the result of a forthcoming reform of migration legislation. What about taxes? So far, the only taxes in effect regarding real estate are the property transfer tax paid by the buyer and income tax by the seller. Ongoing property taxes based on tax assessments were added as part of the tax overhaul law passed during the summer 2012 meeting of Cuba's legislature. But such taxes will be postponed until economic conditions improve and the property registry is updated. The new tax law has not yet been published. published, so details on how the property tax will work are not yet known. Depending on the terms of the tax, it may force some households who had not intended to sell to downsize, crowd in with relatives, or move to low-cost areas. However, tax rates may be very minimal and based on the low official property values. Indeed, exemptions may be granted for low-income families. Is gentrification occurring? Yes, it is. It started in the 1990s with Cuba's economic crisis and is now accelerating. It reflects growing racial and economic inequality and probably contributes to it as well. Is there any danger of homelessness? Well, not from foreclosures, like here, since there are no mortgages on primary residences, but some non-owner household members may be left in the lurch despite the legal requirement that they be protected. Some homeowners may sell to obtain funds to set up a small business, but then fail at the endeavor and be left with neither the business nor a place to live. What does this new real estate market have to do with joint venture, rental, and sales markets for foreigners? Legally, they're totally unrelated. Since the mid-1990s, Cuba has been building upscale apartments for foreigners, originally to sell and then just for rental. Plans include selling golf course condos outright to non-residents with 99-year land leases. Because of time constraints, I'll just list some of the other issues. These include possible speculation, accumulation of wealth, new forms of corruption, special zones where government permission will still be necessary to sell or swap, and the role of brokers and internet ads. Will housing cooperatives be revived? Although greater availability of funds and materials may help repair crumbling dwellings, will Cuba's extraordinary architectural heritage continue to be threatened by sometimes ill-advised additions? Will housing be used more efficiently as small families downsize and others acquire larger homes for bigger households? Or instead, will big houses be sold to wealthy small families or even absentee owners? It's still early in the process, so stay tuned.